I am so excited to be here. This is amazing. I mean, I love Amsterdam already, but this screen is incredible. Before we kick things off, I just want to say a quick thank you to the organizers. Can we get a round of applause for the organizers for putting this together? Awesome. All right, are you ready to make complex and beautiful animations in Vue.js? Yeah? Yeah? It's a little early, but it's OK. Things are going to be moving around the screen. It's going to be a blast. All right. So, OK, my name is Sarah Drasner. This is me as a child and my poor mom and my relationship with authority. I used to be a consultant, which did not mean that I was unemployed. I worked for all of these fine people. But recently, I took a job as a senior cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. And I'm also a Vue core team member. OK, so before we talk about how we're going to animate and get into the code, we should dig into a few reasons why we'd even animate on the web at all. So I'm going to kick it off with a quote. We've evolved to perform actions that flow more or less seamlessly. We aren't wired to deal with the fits and spurts of human-computer interaction. What Tammy is saying with this quote is really that we don't see things in Booleans, right? I didn't come onto the stage by appearing all of a sudden. I transitioned onto the stage. That's what we've kind of been evolutionarily trained to expect. And your occipital lobe only works in 100 millisecond bursts. So we haven't evolved to see something just appear before us. And if anything, we've been trained that if something does just appear in front of us, it's something maybe jarring and something we should look out for, and maybe it's something bad. So if something transitions in front of our view, that's not necessarily a good thing. And timing is critical for jokes, for entrances, for a lot of things. And this is kind of one of those dark UX patterns that you've probably seen over and over again. If you visit a site and within the first second, a modal pops in your face and asks you for your information, that's a little too soon, right? I haven't even explored the site yet. I don't know what's going on. It's come on, buy me a drink first, you know? And if you think I'm being picky, know that Google also agrees and will drop your SEO if you show a timed interstitial on mobile now. So here's an example of how we can gain spatial awareness on the web. It's an example from Code Drops, and you're just choosing your seats in this movie theater, and you can already see that you get a real understanding of the space that's ahead of you and the experience ahead of you in the theater as well. You're also seamlessly transitioned from one view to another. So without those transitions, we lose an opportunity. Things look a little bit more clunky. The user has to readjust and has a little bit of cognitive load in between each view. In Paul Bacchus's Illusion of Speed, he addresses some of these studies that show that a lot of small movements in quick succession can actually make things feel very long because of the cognitive load that it imposes, and whereas one long continuous action is remembered as short. So I made this pen to show what that would look like. In this instance, we have a map marker that turns into a contact form. The contact form becomes the title, and the inputs get out of the way so that you can use them. The inputs then become the loader, which then in turn becomes the success. And then you can put it away. Now, if I asked you where to go get that contact form, you'd say, it's in there. There's no in there. They're just form elements and absolute positioning and hand-wavy animation tricks. But you had a bunch of different views that would have otherwise been expressed with multiple modals, and instead it feels like one continuous experience. So how are we going to animate in Vue? People often ask me how to animate in Vue. And the crazy thing is that there's not just one way. Vue is really elegant because there's a ton of different things that we can do. So let's go through a few of them. First, because Vue is kind of a younger framework, I'm actually going to do some Vue basics just to get the ideas down so that you can understand the code ahead of you as we kind of explore these concepts. But also, Vue has this thing called the transition component that's built in. Vue has a lot of stuff built into it that you can use to create hooks for these animations. So we'll talk about those. We're going to talk about watchers and the reactivity system. A lot of you are probably familiar with what reactivity might be, but we'll talk about what reactivity means in Vue. We'll talk about custom directives, which are one of my favorites. We'll talk about page transitions with Nuxt. You'll hear from the Nuxt guys later today. And we'll do a little bit of data visualization later on. OK, so we don't have a lot of time to dig into all the things that Vue has to offer. But one of the things that I think is really great about Vue is that there was a lot of care put into understanding what the kind of things that developers are always doing over and over and over again. And there's going to be a couple of concepts that we see that kind of get rid of the yak shaving parts of development. And if you're not familiar with the term react shaving, it's the stuff that you have to do the other stuff that you have to do. Like if you have to install, you want to use a CLI tool, and then you have to go install Xcode, that's yak shaving. Those kind of things, probably anything related to Webpack. Sorry, Sean Larkin, wherever you are. So in order to keep you productive, Vue offers a lot of simple things to work with deeper functionality. Directives were kind of stolen from Angular, and it creates a relationship between the data in the instance and component so that you can easily and dynamically update values. So here, this is an example of this. We're going to create a Vue instance, store a basic string in our data so that we can allow the user to modify it, and we're the owner of the state. And if you've worked with React or something, this will be very familiar for you. This is kind of similar to get initial state or something. This text area is just a normal semantic text area, except it has one difference. It has this vModel directive. And that establishes a relationship between the data that we created in that Vue instance and this input. And it's going to output right here. So then when the user types, we're automatically allowing both things to update, but it's also continuing to store and own anything as it enters. And this is pretty rad, because when you're building out a large-scale application, a lot of what we end up doing is responding to user input and storing user input. And you're not checking the DOM here like you would do in jQuery. You're not setting state. You're seamlessly updating in reaction to events. And in terms of animation, because that relationship was established with such ease, it's so incredibly simple to create advanced effects based on information that was given. So you already know half of how that demo was built, and by the end, you're going to know the other half. This, along with all the other abstractions offered, really speeds up our development in this super slick way. OK, so let's dig into the transition component for just a minute. Let's say you have a modal component that only shows based on a condition. And it would look like this, which is easily done. But it's not great. It pops into our face, just like we talked about earlier, that not being good. So if you haven't worked with it before, this is what the transition component looks like. We wrap it in we wrap that conditional in the transition component, and it's super simple. And here you have a few ways of expressing this. So basically, you have these enter states and where it's going to enter to. And then that v_enter_active is everything that happens in between. So we have all of these hooks to use for entrances and exits. And all pieces are optional. So that v_enter_active, that's where we're going to put our transition. Now, we're first going to talk about transitions, and then we're going to talk about CSS animations, then we're going to talk about JavaScript animations. So the very simplest thing here is that we have this transition, and it's super declarative because we're basically just saying, if you are transitioning something, here's what we'd like you to do during that time. And here's the base of what we need. It states the intermediary values and what should happen once something is done entering or leaving. We don't need to declare initial stages because the browser is going to fall back to whatever the default things on those elements are. So here we have it a little bit better, a transition from one state to another rather than a Boolean, so that modal's coming on a little bit more clearly, which is great. But what would happen if we would want to blur out that background so that we're seeing that modal a little bit more clearly? Right now, we're just seeing text. It's laid over that text. So we could use the transition component, but then we'd have to wrap the entire page, and that's not great, right? Sometimes we just want to show and hide things based on a condition. So luckily for us, Vue has our back there, and it's really great at doing that with style bindings. So this is a pretty legible way of adjusting those classes based on a state transition. We're using a simple ternary to state what's happening before and after the transition occurs. And we have these classes here, and we're talking about what we want to have happen before and after. And here we have something expressed in a couple lines of code, a much better modal, which is now blurring out the background. So that's the base of the transition component, but it also offers one of my favorite parts, which is this thing called transition modes. And what transition modes do is, there's a lot of times where something doesn't just enter and leave, something else is entering and leaving too. You have like an on-off button, or you have something transitioning in as something's transitioning out. And usually, if we want to stack those and we want to say, as this thing leaves the DOM, we want this other thing to come in, we'd have to write a callback. Or we would have to, if we're using CSS animations, we'd stagger in delays, which kind of sucks because if you change the duration, you also have to change the delay time. But Vue has this thing called transition modes where you can simply state out in, and it's going to wait for the other thing to exit before the next thing enters in. So this is really very intuitive. So without this, this is what like an on-off state might be. There's just a moment there where both of those things are in the DOM at once, and it's kind of clunky. So if you look at this example, these are actually two elements. It's not one element flipping. It's two elements. So I've got one that flips to go sideways, and this other one is waiting, and it's sideways, and then it kind of transitions up. But because we're using that out-in, it just happens really seamlessly, and it looks like it's one thing. So without that, the animation fires all at once, and you kind of miss one of the transitions there. So there are two modes, in, out, and out, in. I would definitely say that like 9 times out of 10, I'm just using the out, in. That's pretty much it. So if you want to play around with these, pretty much start with that one and then move from there. So we have this transition component, the transition mode, and we're using a slot here to easily replace the content. And we can have defaults, we can have named slots, all of these really nice things here. OK, so we talked about transition. We talked about the transition component. So how about CSS animation? Well, we'll still use the transition component, but we can now assign classes if we want to the enter and leave state, so we can build out more complex things. We can even use animation libraries if we want, if you want to plug into CSS animation libraries. So we have these enter active class, leave active class. And then we have something like this ball bouncing and then the ball rolling out. And you can't do that with transitions, right? You need a few more steps in that keyframe. So here's what that would look like. We have the enter active within that transition component. And then, ball bounces in CSS are a bit of a drag, so I use a mix in here to dry it out a little bit. But what's really good at bounces is JavaScript. So let's talk about JavaScript next. JavaScript is kind of like getting to the good stuff because it's super powerful for animation. So let's do some really cool things with Vue and JavaScript hooks. OK, so we have some custom naming for all of these hooks that are available for us. You can see that we're binding the CSS to false. That's to let the transition component know, don't look in the CSS for this, look in the JavaScript. And here's the most basic of all of those. So you don't actually need all this stuff at all. I usually use something like this. There's really not that many things that you need to use all of these for. So here's kind of the base of what I would use. And here are what the methods would look like. I have the before, the entering, and the leaving, and I'm also saying done so that I can kind of coordinate those transition modes as well. So in this demo that you saw before, we're hooking up vModel and animating our text onto the book in a really playful manner. Here we've got a transition component with before enter, enter, and a CSS false binding. And in the data, we have the default content. So this is just like setting the CSS on the element before anything happens to it, or setting the styles on the element. And people ask me why I wouldn't just set that in the CSS instead. Well, here's the thing about perspective kind of things. Perspective 3D and like preserve 3D and perspective and stuff doesn't actually make the element look different until it's animating. So if someone doesn't know, if you're working on a big team and someone doesn't know a lot about animation, they might come along and see your code and rip that out. That, we're developers, we love ripping out code. It's like, this is totally useless. Oh, the animation broke. I have no idea why. So this kind of keeps all of the animation logic together, and then you can also kind of iterate as you need to. And then in the enter, I just have a for loop where I'm bouncing things around. And ta-da, you know how to do that entire thing now. So that's such a super party. OK, so now we talked about the transition component. You guys are superstars. You know all about it. You're experts. Now we're going to talk about the transition group component. This is a really fun one. You might be familiar with the flip technique, but in case you aren't, it's a technique used often for animation because the property that's causes the least amount of repaints in the browser is transitions, if you need to move them. Top, left, margins, things like that will cause a lot of repaints, will cause jank and stuff. So in order to make elements move around the screen from one place to another in a really seamless and buttery way, we can do this thing where we use get bounding client rect or get bbox and figure out the coordinates of each and then invert that and move them from one to another. Now, if that sounds complicated, it's because it is. It's actually kind of a drag to make all of these calculations. I do it all the time. But here's the thing, it's more of a drag to do it for hundreds of elements. And that's when you really need it. That's when the DOM is really going to pay attention to how much you're moving stuff around. So that's really important. So the cool thing about the transition component is it has flip under the hood. You get it for free. You don't have to do any of the calculations. Vue's going to just handle all of that for you. You just put it in a transition group. So if I have this transition group here, and I have this like lazy Sudoku puzzle, you can just keep hitting this, and you can see all of the elements moving around, and it's super slick and super buttery. And this is even like a recording of it, so it's even less super slick and super buttery. But this is from the Vue guide. So we did very little to achieve that. And if you're wondering how we would use this in a real-life application, sometimes we want to sort and filter data. So like a big table like this, and Snipcart had this great article showing all of these things. This is an actual code pen, so if you want to go look at this link later, you can go check out all the code. It's really great to use this kind of calculation in conjunction with a computed property, which I don't have time to cover today, but you should look into it if you want to do this kind of animation and apply this kind of logic. Okay, let's leverage the reactivity system for transitions. We talked about the transition component, but it's also fitting because Vue is reactive that we would use that reactivity in order to create some transitions. And the way that we're going to plug into the system is a thing called watchers. In order for you to kind of understand what we do when we're working with them, let's talk a little bit about reactivity in general first. I think sometimes people are a little bit confused, maybe, about what reactive is. A lot of people, if you ask people what reactive programming is, they'll say RxJS. And they're not wrong. RxJS is indeed reactive. But reactive programming is a kind of larger tent that a lot of different things can fall under. And RxJS is just one application of this big programming idea and concept. So let's define it. Okay, reactive programming is programming with asynchronous data streams. You've probably heard something like this before, and it maybe didn't make perfect sense to you. So I'm going to go into one step further and kind of break it down one more level. A stream is a sequence of ongoing events ordered in time that offer some hooks with which to observe it. This is really great because when we're building applications, a lot of what we're doing is reacting to changes. So when we use reactive premises for building applications, this means it's really easy for us to update state in reaction to events. The kind of canonical example that a lot of people use is an Excel spreadsheet, actually. So if you have a cell and another cell, and then you take those two cells and you make a sum or something, you have that sum, but if you updated the value at the top, it would continuously update in the one beneath it. And that's kind of like the way that we would think about those streams. All right, so Andre Saltz has a great post on this if you want to check that out. So what is reactive in terms of frameworks, since we're talking about frameworks today? Angular 1.x has dirty checking. Cycle and Angular 2 use reactive streams like Xstream and RxJS. Vue, mobx, and reactive all use a variation of getters and setters. So Vue uses getters and setters. And despite the name, React is not reactive. It uses a pull approach rather than a push approach. And if you want to read more resources, Dan Abramoff pointed me to that piece of the React design documentation if you want to read more. And there's the Vue reactivity documentation. And Damian Dulles, who I think is here today, wrote this amazing post about all of this, which you should definitely check out. Okay, so if we represent the data that we want to check in data, remember that data, we have this counter. If we apply a watch, like that watch that we talked about earlier, to that counter, you can see every single time this updates and changes, we get a console log. So we really can hook into and react to any change events. And if the state is similar enough, you can simply transition the state with watchers. So here I've built from scratch a chart with Vue, and as the data changes, watchers will update it and simply transition between them. And SVG is really good for this task because SVG is built with math. So here's an example of what I would do to build out this chart. I'm not using D3 or anything. I'm just using the directives here. So I'm using v-for loops and vbind to create a really flexible axis for our chart, and the bars itself are even easier to update. So you don't even need to load a giant charting library at all to create something like this. And in the animation itself, first we're going to create a dummy object that will get updated by our animation library. Then we'll have an update function that's invoked on every tween set. We'll use this to push the data. And then we create an object to hold the source data to be tweened and the function pointer for the update events. And in this for loop, we turn the current index into a string so that then we can tween over the target dummy object, but only for this specific key. So you can also use animation and watchers to create something like this time difference dial that's going in between states, both in a kind of visual way, but also for the time. So I travel a bit for work, and my coworkers are all in different areas, and I wanted a way to track our time in this local time thing. My coworker Simona is here today. She lives in London. I live in Denver, so I can see what time it is where she's living, pretty easily. And the syntax highlighting fell off of this, of course. But so we're watching the check property, and we'll fire different animations and change the hue and saturation and some other elements based on the relative association to the current time. And as a quick side note, by using a native method in the spec called toLocaleTimeString, I was able to remove a whole moment.js library, which is really, really large, because it respects all of the kind of daytime coordinates and daylight savings times. And with Vue, we can also respond to synthetic events midstream, like I did this ball bouncing, and you can update the radius and the height of the bounce while it's moving. And we don't have to plug into watchers to leverage them to interpolate styles either. Vue offers those class and style bindings that let us connect user interaction with element styles. So you may have seen similar demos to this with CSS variables in JavaScript, but in this case, Vue allows for much wider support back to old IE. So in this instance here, we start with an x and y at 0, and then we're binding them to eClient x and y, and then we can hook it into our styles, which in this case is perspective origin. All right, so now let's talk about some ways to animate SVGs with Vue. Since SVGs offer a navigable DOM, we can use Vue directives with them, as you kind of saw earlier, and we can also use transition components, you name it. So Vue and SVG animation are kind of made for each other. So let's look at this little Wally I built. He's going to try to find your mouse, but in this case, it's like his cockroach friend. And he moves around and kind of blinks and looks a little bit alive, and he follows his buddy around. And it's also worth mentioning that anytime you cause a user to feel something, it attaches emotions attached to their limbic system, so it's easier for them to remember things. So in the Vue template, we create this mouse move event in the HTML, and then in the methods in JavaScript, there's a bit of logic I'm not showing here, but basically we plug into the event values and use GreenSock Animation API's progress to plot along those values. So basically you can think of it like this. I made this entire animation, and I made it like a hookup to this timeline that GreenSock has. So the whole thing moves like this, and then I pause that timeline, and there's this thing called progress that's within GreenSock Animation API. I hook that in to what we have for the coordinates, and then I'm able to scrub the progress of whatever timeline I have. So it's kind of fun. You can do all sorts of kind of interactive things with it. And so far, all of our animations have been in lockstep with one another with some small piece of our application. But what happens if we have a giant application and there's a bit of state that's shared across the entire application? So let's look at Vuex for just a second and how we can use Vuex and animation. Oh, and Vuex is kind of like Redux if you're used to React instead. So if we have these weather notifications coming in, once we've encapsulated what's changing, the component owns its own state, and the entrance will always be consistent as well as the exit. So in this example, I'm not even passing the state around. I create a central store in Vuex, and I use these mutations to kind of order these templates, and then I can change their visibility by advancing the templates and looping back around to the beginning. And this is inside of one SVG. We have different components that are in these Gs that are the groups in SVG, and based on the state of our store, each with their own entrance. And here we commit to the store whenever the toggle fires, and we have all of our animation logic, and that is off of that mounted hook. That's a lifecycle hook. So anytime that component is mounted, so if you work with React, that would be component did mount or something. So here are a bunch of those kind of lifecycle hooks. You can hook into any number of those. I use mounted very frequently for animation because then I know all the elements are there. Okay, great. So now let's talk about, we did a bunch of stuff. Let's talk about, we've got 2 more to go. We've got custom directives. If you've never worked with a custom directive before, we're going to go over how to create them and how to use them for animation. So directives, to remind you, is like, you know, that V model that we had in the beginning, those little pieces of the HTML that we're using to kind of work in tandem with Vue. So let's talk about how to make a custom directive. Here's how we would make one. It's probably most common to hook into bind. So we've created a custom directive called tack, so it'll be vtack on our element, but it's actually not that useful yet, right? We've just set the element's style to position fixed. But let's do one better. Let's pass a value into the directive. We'll make it a little bit more flexible, and then we can tell the vtack directive to stick this element 70 pixels from the top of the page. That's a little bit better. That's getting, you know, more useful. But we can pass more than one argument. So let's make this even more flexible, and now we can put this all over the page, and we can stick something anywhere. So that's pretty cool, but like maybe we should apply this to animation. So in this example, we'll create a directive that attaches to the scroll event, and it allows you to hook into some functionality that lets you do animation on something and then removes that listener. So now we're cooking with gas. We can emit an entire library like waypoints, and or like scroll magic or something like that, and just use these custom directives to orchestrate interesting interactions all over our pages. So I'm in the process of making this demo, but here's a sneak peek. We can use these custom directives to hook into D3's functionality, and we can do some scrollytelling with some NASA data about fireballs. And here you see our custom directive in action. We use this to update all of those circles based on the fireball data that we got from NASA, and we update all of the visualizations on this page. So we're moving all of these coordinates around. If you understand SVG, this obviously makes it a little bit easier. And so we've got that VD scroll, that's that total impact, and then we're going to return at the bottom. Okay, the last thing we're going to do, Nuxt routing and page transitions. You're going to actually hear a whole talk about Nuxt today, but Nuxt is really, really awesome because it offers us some ways to hook into animation. So let's talk about that last. So you might have heard a lot about server-side rendering of late. It's really, really compelling because it has really great performance benefits. It's really great for SEO because everything is directly on the page. If we render all of the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript on the server, we have less JavaScript to parse when the client is when we're actually using all of our applications, so all of our load times are a little bit better. So one of my favorite quotes about server-side rendering is this: by rendering on the server, you can cache the final shape of your data. So if you don't already have Vue CLI installed, which you should definitely check out, it's really, really awesome. Here's that command. We only have to run that once. Then once it's installed, anytime we want to start a project, we'll write vue init nuxt starter and then the name of your project. So now you can have code splitting, routing, server-side rendering, and it's all set up without even stepping outside of a Vue file. So you're given this index page in the pages directory. So I dumped that content. I made some dummy page. I made a duplicate of that and made these Nuxt links that point to each other. And now I have a fully routed server-side rendering single-page application without ever stepping outside of a Vue file. I'm still using .vue and single-file components for all of this. And Nuxt is really amazing because it already provides us a transition hook. So you know that transition component we were using and the hooks that it gives us, we already have that with this page prefix. So if I'm going to use nuxt for my application, I can actually just apply this to the page, and it will create all of these page transitions for me. And this is really amazing because it's really hard to coordinate page transitions usually. It ends up being kind of a mess usually, and this is just like the simplest way possible to have these hooks. And we don't just have to use transitions, we can create animations too. We would never do this. Don't ever do this. I just wanted to have some fun because, you know, why not? But don't do this, and don't say Sarah told you to. But of course, my favorite thing are the JavaScript hooks. So we have those transition modes available to us, so we can wait until one page is done transitioning out before transitioning in, and we can create really complex animation. So here we've got like these mountains and letters all moving in, and every single page has different animation. So I can keep going in between the pages, and they all each have their own entrances and their own exits. And you know, one of the really nice things about it is because I'm using SVG here, everything is also fully responsive very, very quickly. So here's the repo if you want to explore the code as well as the demo site. Vue makes it extraordinarily simple to create complex and beautiful interactions that feel seamless to our users. We can connect states and reduce cognitive load for things that are changing in our application with ease. And I'd like to say on a personal note that sometimes building and maintaining large-scale applications on corporate deadlines can kind of bum you out. And I was starting to feel a lot of burnout from doing this. And by starting to work with animation, something that gives you this dopamine rush for your users as well as yourself as you see things kind of coming alive on the screen, I was able to stave off burnout and remember why I love working on the web so damn much. Thank you.